When we think about a bank account, there's this built-in expectation of strict accounting.
Right. It's totally rigid.
Yeah, you pull your phone out of your pocket, you open up the app, and there are the numbers staring right back at you.
You can see your balances down to the literal penny.
Down to the penny, you have funds or you're overdrawn. It's a clean, binary reality.
And that reality brings a certain comfort, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
As human beings, we like our resources to be visible. We want them to be measurable. We want to look at a ledger and know, well, precisely what we have in reserve so we can plan our next move.
But then you step into the realm of our own lifespans.
That's where it all falls apart.
It really does. You look at our own mortal clock, and suddenly that slick little banking app is completely broken.
The screen goes blank.
Yeah, we're looking at a resource landscape that is, well, honestly, it's terrifyingly murky. We cannot see the balance.
It's the absolute definition of living on an unknown, dwindling line of credit.
I mean, you wake up every morning and spend 24 hours, but you have no idea if your account holds another 50 years or another 50 minutes.
Which is a heavy thought to start the day with.
It is, but it's where we need to be today. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we're taking a deep dive into a piercing historic sermon by Charles Haddon Spurgeon.
The classic.
It's titled, "The Time is Short," based on the biblical text of 1 Corinthians 7:29. Our mission for this conversation is to unpack Spurgeon's intense, urgent plea regarding the brevity of human life.
And we are going to take his historical warnings, which he preached to massive crowds in 19th century London, and apply them directly to you.
Yes, to your daily habits, your casual conversations, and your spiritual focus right now in the 21st century.
Which is an incredibly sobering task, because Spurgeon isn't just talking about abstract, high-level theological concepts here.
No, he's getting right down into the weeds.
He's targeting the very minutes and hours we consume every single day. He is forcing us to look at how we spend the one currency we can never earn back.
So, to you listening, have you ever felt like the weeks are slipping by faster than they used to?
I feel that all the time.
Right, like you blink, and suddenly another month is gone, another season has changed, and you're left wondering where the time went.
This conversation is going to challenge how you spend your remaining hours on Earth.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand how to use our hours, we first have to look at how poorly humans perceive the length of their own existence.
We are terrible at it.
We really are. Spurgeon opens this sermon with a fascinating premise. He says everyone intellectually knows life is brief, yet practically we function as if we have endless years.
Yes. The disconnect between our head and our practical reality is staggering.
It's like we easily spot the gray hairs and the wrinkles appearing on our neighbors, right?
Oh, yeah. And we automatically assume they're nearing the end of their line.
But then, at the exact same time, we harbor this bizarre, almost comical optimism about our own longevity.
We think everyone else is mortal, but somehow we're the exception to the rule.
It's wild. We recognize the fragility of the human frame and everyone around us, but we just block it out when we look in the mirror.
Which is a massive psychological blind spot.
We look at someone else's receding hairline and think, man, time is catching up with him.
But we look in our own mirror and think, oh, I have decades left to do everything I want.
I have plenty of time to start that project or mend that relationship.
Or get serious about my faith.
Why do we do this? What is the mechanism behind this shared delusion?
Well, it boils down to a psychological survival mechanism, essentially.
So?
If we walked around every single second of the day, acutely aware that our hearts could stop beating at any moment, the anxiety would completely paralyze us.
We wouldn't be able to function.
Right, we wouldn't build homes or raise children or plan for the future. So the human brain engages in what psychologists call temporal discounting, combined with a healthy dose of denial.
We push the reality of death so far out onto the horizon that it becomes a theoretical concept.
Rather than an impending reality, we operate under the delusion of limitless opportunity.
And what's fascinating here is how Spurgeon shatters this illusion. He doesn't just say life is short and leave it there for us to casually agree with.
He forces the issue.
He uses 4 distinct vantage points to force the listener to look at human life from the outside in.
The first one is brilliant. He brings up the angel's view.
Think about a being who has existed since the dawn of creation.
To an angel, humans look like insects or leaves. We sprout, we flutter around for a fraction of a second, and we wither.
Because an angel has watched massive empires rise and fall, like the changing of the seasons.
They watched Babylon crumble, they watched Rome burn, they've seen entire civilizations swept away.
So to them, our 70 or 80 years are a microscopic blip on the radar.
It makes me think of time-lapse photography.
Oh, I love that. Have you ever seen a nature documentary where they show a flower blooming and dying in 10 seconds on film?
Yes. The camera sits there for weeks, but they compress it.
The petals open in a burst of color and then instantly shrivel, droop, and turn brown.
Right. On film, it looks so fragile and fleeting. It's just a quick flash, and then it's gone entirely.
Why is it so difficult for us to apply that same time-lapse lens to our own daily anxieties and ambitions?
That's the million-dollar question.
I mean, we get so worked up over an awkward email from a coworker or a delayed flight at the airport.
Or a scratch on our car.
Yes. But in the time-lapse of eternity, it doesn't even register.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's because we are trapped inside the frame. When you are the flower, the blooming feels like an eternity.
Your entire reality is contained within that brief span.
This is why Spurgeon moves to the second vantage point to try and pull us out of the frame. He uses the ancient trees view.
Picture an old oak tree standing in a forest for centuries.
It would look at human generations as infants passing by. The tree was a tiny acorn when your great-grandparents were born.
It weathered storms while your grandparents lived their entire lives.
And it will still be dropping leaves long after you are gone.
That puts things in perspective. Then he zooms in a little closer with the third perspective, which is the old man's view.
This one hits very close to home for anyone who has lived past middle age.
Spurgeon notes that a 70-year-old looks back at his own youth as if it were yesterday.
All those years, all those decades of striving, working, and building, he feels that his entire life was just a brief watch in the night.
He remembers leaving his father's house as a young apprentice, like it happened last week.
Now his grandchildren are climbing on his knee.
The present moment is always perplexing, isn't it? It always feels solid and substantial, but once it passes, it collapses into a memory that feels incredibly brief.
And then he brings in the ultimate vantage point, the fourth perspective, which frames all the others.
God's view.
To the Creator, 1,000 years are as a single day.
In the sight of God, human lifespans are microscopic.
Drawing from Psalm 90, we're described as grasshoppers, ephemera.
We spring up like grass in the morning, and by evening we are mowed down and wither.
Compared to the lifetime of the eternal God, there's almost no comparison to be made. It's like comparing a single grain of sand to the entire known universe.
So what does this all mean for us today? If anything, it feels like modern society makes this delusion of endless time even worse than it was in Spurgeon's day.
I would say it absolutely does.
I think about our digital media, our constant stream of entertainment, even our medical advancements. They all insulate you from the reality of death.
We hide aging with cosmetics and surgeries.
We hide sickness behind hospital doors.
We live in a culture that worships youth and sweeps mortality under the rug at every possible opportunity.
In the 19th century, when Spurgeon was preaching this message, death was a much more visible part of daily life.
People passed away in their own homes, in the parlor room. Infant mortality was staggeringly high.
Today, we've institutionalized the end of life. We outsource it to facilities, which makes Spurgeon's wake-up call even more urgent for us.
We're more distracted and more insulated from our own fragility than any generation before us.
Because our earthly window is so incredibly small, the way we allocate our minutes carries immense eternal weight.
Think back to that bank account analogy.
Yeah.
If you only have a few dollars left, you don't go out and buy something trivial. You spend it on something that matters.
This leads directly to Spurgeon's fierce warning against wasting time. The time is short, so he warns us heavily against triviality and distraction.
And his list of warnings is highly specific. He warns against unprofitable amusements, senseless talk, idle gossip, and domestic scandals.
He's painting a picture of a life that is frittered away, squandered on things that have absolutely zero eternal value.
In his day, maybe that looked like endless parlor games or spreading rumors over tea.
Today, it looks like spending 4 hours a day swiping through short-form videos on a smartphone, completely numb to the world around us.
Spot on.
He shares two striking historical examples in the text to back this up. The first is Cotton Mather, the Puritan minister. Apparently, Mather was so fiercely protective of his time and so frustrated by trivial social calls interrupting his work that he declared he would rather give a visitor a handful of money than have them waste his time.
Which is a brilliant, highly convicting way to frame the value of time versus money.
We protect our wallets fiercely. We set up passwords, two-factor authentication, and biometric locks to keep people from stealing our cash.
But we will let absolutely anyone steal our hours.
Mather understood a fundamental economic reality. You can always earn more money,
You can take a second job. You can sell an asset.
but you cannot manufacture a single extra hour. Once a minute is spent, it's gone forever.
Then there's the example of Henry Martin.
The missionary.
Right, celebrated because it was said he never wasted a single hour. Not one.
I hear that, and my mind immediately jumps to how many hours I have lost. Just aimlessly refreshing a news feed or watching a show I don't even like.
Well, there is a sharp distinction in the text that we need to clarify, so we don't fall into a trap of legalism here.
Please do.
Spurgeon is not saying you have to be working at a fever pitch, sweating and toiling 24 hours a day. He draws a clear line between necessary recreation and vain dissipation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Necessary recreation braces the nerves and invigorates the mind. Resting is not wasting time.
That is a relief to hear, honestly.
Right, going for a walk in the woods, enjoying a quiet moment on the porch, getting a full night's sleep, those things restore you for the work ahead.
They're necessary for a finite human body.
Vain dissipation, on the other hand, drains and distracts you. It's engaging in frothy, meaningless activity that leaves you emptier than when you started.
It doesn't refresh your mind, it just numbs it.
Exactly.
Okay, I have to push back here a little bit. Spurgeon is highly critical of two believers meeting and only talking about the weather or the frost. He practically rolls his eyes at them in the text.
He really does.
But isn't small talk a necessary social lubricant? Are we expected to instantly jump into heavy theological discourse the moment we say hello to someone in the grocery store?
That would be awkward.
Right. Hi, nice to see you. Let's discuss the nature of the Trinity. That sounds exhausting and, frankly, a little weird.
That raises a valid point, and we have to read Spurgeon with some common sense. Small talk might open a door.
It's an icebreaker.
It might be the social handshake that initiates a connection between two people. But getting stuck there is the tragedy Spurgeon is highlighting.
Oh, okay.
He's looking at men and women who are redeemed, who have experienced grace, who have a living hope, and all they can muster is a 10-minute conversation about slipping on the ice or complaining about the rain.
So it's about getting stuck in the shallow end of the pool.
Precisely. Spurgeon wants believers to speak of the glory of God's kingdom. If you belong to Christ, your tongue should be an instrument of grace, not just a localized weather report.
Small talk is fine for the porch. It gets you up the steps.
But you shouldn't spend your whole life standing outside on the porch when there is a massive house of glorious truth to walk into together. The time is too short to only ever discuss the frost.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Time is not just wasted in trivial chatter or mindless scrolling. It's often squandered by people who have excellent intentions but never actually take action.
The trap of indecision.
Yes, the danger of grand illusions. Spurgeon brings up a severe critique of vacillation, people who resolve to do great things for God but continually postpone their plans.
They scheme, they plan, they start up from a slumber feeling highly motivated, only to sink back down into a drowsier state a few days later.
There's this striking analogy in the source material about a Russian czar who always wanted to take a second step before he took the first, which left him entirely paralyzed.
Spurgeon notes that people dream of grand, imposing projects like converting the whole continent of Europe or launching a massive charitable organization, but end up doing absolutely nothing.
This is a devastating critique of the idle brain.
Let's break down the psychology of this for a moment. Dreaming about a massive, continent-wide revival feels spiritually satisfying to the person dreaming it.
You get the emotional rush.
The dopamine hit of imagining a great victory for the kingdom. Your brain rewards you just for imagining the scenario.
But the catch is, it requires absolutely no immediate sacrifice.
You don't have to actually do anything hard.
Exactly. You don't have to face rejection from your neighbor. You don't have to give up your evening comfort to volunteer, because the goal is so massive, it remains safely theoretical.
You can sit in your armchair and feel very spiritual while doing nothing.
Spurgeon argues, it is far better to plant a single blade of grass or slay a single enemy than to sit around dreaming about reclaiming the entire Sahara Desert.
Think about that. What grand illusions are you harboring right now?
Are you waiting until you have a massive, overflowing savings account to start giving to the poor?
Are you waiting until you feel like you have a master's degree in theology before you share the gospel with your coworker?
The time to act on a small scale is right now. Better to do one tangible small thing today than to hold on to a majestic dream that never materializes.
Because the clock is ticking. Every second you spend sketching out the elaborate blueprints for a castle you will never actually build is a second you could have used to lay a single, solid brick in reality.
And that brings us to another trap, which is perhaps the most subtle one in the entire sermon. Even those who are intensely focused on religion, who aren't distracted by gossip, and who aren't paralyzed by grand illusions, can still waste their brief lives if their focus is misdirected.
Let's unpack the trap of theological wrangling.
This is a fascinating section, especially considering who is speaking. Spurgeon expresses immense frustration with believers who spend their microscopic lives arguing over obscure, controversial points of doctrine.
He mentions ancient scholars debating how many angels can fit on the point of a needle.
And then he points out the modern equivalents, people obsessing over deciphering the intricate symbols in Ezekiel, or predicting the exact timelines of the apocalypse while the world around them perishes.
We have to pause and recognize the staggering theological weight of this critique.
Because Charles Spurgeon was a firm adherent to Reformed principles. He loved theology.
He studied deeply, he preached massive doctrinal concepts, but for him, the goal of theology is not winning an intellectual debate in a classroom or a comment section online.
The goal is saving souls and instructing saints in practical godliness.
To ignore the burning building of a lost world while you stand outside arguing over the architectural blueprints of the house is a severe, almost criminal misuse of time.
He shares a humorous but very pointed anecdote in the text about a brother who constantly tries to bait him into a debate about free agency and predestination.
Oh, this part's brilliant.
Spurgeon literally told the man he was too busy to discuss it and would have to defer the debate until after the Day of Judgment.
Which is a clever evasion, but it also shows that he understood priority. He wasn't saying the topic didn't matter. He was saying the timing was completely wrong.
It makes me think of a surgeon in a busy emergency room. A patient comes in bleeding profusely after an accident.
Right.
And the surgeon refuses to apply pressure, refuses to start an IV, because they are too busy debating the historical origins of the surgical scalpel with a colleague.
Or arguing about the chemical composition of the thread used for stitches while the patient bleeds out on the table.
Knowledge is incredibly valuable, but when the time is short, application supersedes endless speculation.
You want to study the deep mysteries of the faith? Fine, study them. But do not do it at the expense of the bleeding soul right in front of you.
So, having stripped away the trivialities of small talk, having torn down the procrastination of the idle brain, and having pushed aside the distraction of theological wrangling, what should a believer's life actually look like?
If we're clearing all the brush away, what is left?
Spurgeon pleads for absolute singleness of purpose.
He introduces this incredible visual of a river. Most people, he observes, let their lives run away in a dozen little trickling rivulets.
A little energy goes toward their career ambition, a little toward gathering riches.
A little toward worldly reputation, a little toward their hobbies.
The water spreads out over a wide area and becomes a shallow, stagnant swamp.
Nothing moves. Nothing has power.
Spurgeon says you must coop the water up into one forceful, roaring channel directed entirely at the glory of God.
I love that imagery. A trickling rivulet has no force. You can step right over it. A child can splash in it.
But a roaring channel, cooped up and carved into one specific direction, can cut through solid rock. It can power a turbine. It has massive momentum.
This leads to what Spurgeon calls his daydream of an ideal life.
He pictures a young boy who believes in Jesus early in his life.
This boy never backslides, continually grows in grace, and invests every ounce of his one talent, which is his fleeting time, for God's honor.
He envisions a complete biography where the slender threads of passing moments are gathered up into a magnificent, unified fabric.
Every action, every thought directed downstream toward that one goal.
He contrasts this ideal with the reality of so many people who spend dreary intervals wandering away, getting lukewarm, realizing they messed up, repenting, and having to retrace their steps.
So much time is lost in that exhausting cycle of wandering off the path and bushwhacking back to it.
And this section includes a very intense, highly revealing personal prayer from Spurgeon himself.
He asks God to get as much glory out of him as possible, regardless of the method required.
He says he is completely willing to be cast into the furnace of affliction.
He is willing to have his name trampled in the dust, to become a public reproach and a byword among men, as long as God uses him to the absolute maximum capacity.
That is a staggering level of surrender. It makes you really stop and evaluate your own heart.
Do you possess that same radical willingness to be used no matter the cost to your personal reputation?
We all want God to use us, but we usually add a silent condition to our prayers.
Right. Use me as long as it makes me look successful.
Use me, as long as my peers respect me.
Use me as long as I stay comfortable.
We want to be the roaring river, but we want the river to flow safely through a manicured, predictable golf course, not a rugged, dangerous canyon.
Spurgeon is saying that if you want singleness of purpose, you have to relinquish control over the terrain your life flows through.
You supply the focus, God chooses the path.
This unified focus must immediately translate into action, specifically how we handle the eternal state of those around us.
Spurgeon urges believers to act instantly in evangelism. He says, if your children are unsaved, pray with them tonight. Do not wait for tomorrow morning. Tomorrow is an illusion.
The urgency here is palpable in the text. Every tick of the clock on the wall is saying now.
He recounts this tragic, gut-wrenching story from his own experience.
An employer felt prompted to speak to a worker about his soul.
He had a sudden conviction that he needed to have a serious conversation with this man, but he let the demands of business distract him.
He had emails to answer, ledgers to balance.
He resolved to do it next time. Before next time arrived, a messenger brought news that the worker had suddenly died.
The heavy burden of missed opportunities.
The sheer agony that employer felt is a direct result of ignoring the ticking clock.
If we go back to your bank account analogy from earlier, he assumed he had a bottomless bank account of days.
He assumed the worker did too.
He thought there were plenty of funds left to make that withdrawal later, but the account was already empty. The line of credit was pulled.
Okay, I have to ask you about this because this level of intense urgency can feel paralyzing. How do believers balance this almost terrifying awareness of brevity with the need to build authentic, non-transactional relationships with non-believers?
That's a tough balance.
How do you act urgently without acting frantically? If I walk around convinced everyone might die tomorrow, I might just run around screaming at people on the street with a megaphone, which is rarely effective and usually just pushes people away.
That is a crucial distinction we have to make. Urgency does not equal panic.
Right.
Panic is erratic, thoughtless, and usually entirely driven by unmanaged fear. True urgency is highly focused, intentional, and driven by love.
Think of the emergency room doctor again.
They are dealing with literal life and death every single minute of their shift. Are they running around the hospital screaming at the top of their lungs?
No. They are calm, precise, and highly deliberate in their movements.
They do not waste time, but they also do not skip necessary steps to stabilize the patient. You can build an authentic relationship with someone while maintaining a clear internal awareness that the time is short.
So it is about internal intentionality, not external anxiety.
Precisely. It means you do not let the relationship stall at the weather.
You gently, purposefully steer the conversation toward eternal things without delay, but also without hostility.
You don't leave things unsaid when a natural door opens in the conversation. You step through it immediately with grace because you know you might not get a second chance.
This shortness of time, it doesn't just compel us to act outward toward others. Spurgeon shows how it entirely reframes how we process our own inward suffering and our earthly possessions.
Let's look at the perspective on earthly hardships and wealth.
He lists various trials a person might face in this fallen world. Poverty, bitter cold,
A trembling frame from a disease like consumption.
mocking neighbors, cruel taunts from enemies.
And his answer to all of them, to every single grievance, is the exact same phrase: the time is short.
It is like the concept of a miserable train ride.
Imagine you are on a train. The seat is hard as a rock, the window is broken and letting in freezing rain, and the person sitting next to you is mocking you incessantly.
If you think this train ride is going to last for 60 years, you are going to be absolutely miserable.
You will cry, you will fight the passenger next to you, you will fall into total despair.
But what if you know the train ride is only 5 minutes long, and it drops you off at a breathtaking, peaceful mansion that you get to live in forever?
The brevity of the trip completely alters your relationship to the discomfort.
Right. You don't cry about the uncomfortable seat. You endure it with a smile, maybe even a laugh, because you know you are traveling at express speed toward your Father's house.
The cold wind blowing through the window doesn't bother you because you can already see the lights of the station approaching.
That is a phenomenal analogy.
Mm.
And Spurgeon applies this identical logic to the opposite end of the spectrum, wealth and possessions.
Just as the shortness of time dulls the sting of poverty, it also defleets the arrogance of wealth.
He mocks the idea of finding security in broad acres of land or abundant crops. You brought nothing into the world, and you will carry nothing out.
He brings up the concept of a 999-year lease on an estate, which was a common legal arrangement in England at the time.
People sign these leases feeling like they have secured their legacy forever. They feel like kings of their own little dirt empires.
Spurgeon rejects that entirely, preferring freeholds, but he makes a devastating point. The unconverted person cannot even guarantee they will hold their physical property for 3 weeks.
Earthly wealth offers absolutely zero immunity from sickness or the cold reality of the grave.
You can have the biggest bank account, the most secure real estate portfolio, and the most advanced expensive healthcare plan on the planet, and the mortal clock ticks down at the exact same speed for you as it does for the beggar shivering on the street corner.
Death is the great equalizer. It strips everyone down to the exact same state.
This is why, while the rapid approach of eternity is a massive comfort to the suffering believer on that miserable train ride, it is an absolute catastrophe for those who have not trusted in Christ.
Which brings us to the final, most chilling section of the text, the dismal knell for the unconverted.
Spurgeon tolls a heavy bell of alarm for the unsaved listener. He paints a stark, uncompromising reality.
A person might succeed in business. They might buy a massive estate. They might gather immense wealth, respect, and social standing.
But if they die without Christ, they have failed to secure the only thing that actually lasts past their final heartbeat: eternal life.
He paints this bleak, haunting picture of the end, an illness that does not yield to any medical treatment.
A doctor leaving the room in dismay, shaking his head.
Terrified family members standing around the bed, helpless.
And finally, the transition of a lost spirit, waking up in agony, asking for a drop of water to cool their tongue.
The theological reality he presents here is severe, and it is unflinching.
Without repentance and belief in Jesus, the short step of physical death leads directly, immediately, to eternal ruin.
There is no middle ground in Spurgeon's framework. There is no purgatory, no second chance after the breath leaves the lungs.
The transition is immediate and it is final. And again, he points out the absolute impartiality of the situation.
Earthly status is entirely irrelevant at the moment of death. The universe does not care about your 999-year lease or your stock portfolio when your lungs stop expanding.
Spurgeon even contemplates his own death to drive this point home to his congregation.
He imagines his own future funeral in the text. He pictures people in the busy streets of London asking, "Who is to be buried today? Why the massive crowd?"
And someone answering, "It is the man who preached at the tabernacle."
He knows his own clock is ticking just as fast as his listeners.
His greatest desire, as he faced his own mortality in front of his congregation, was that his conscience would be clear of their blood.
He wanted to know that he warned them plainly. He didn't soften the blow to make them like him more.
He didn't waste his brief minutes with them standing in the pulpit talking about the frost or the political news of the day.
He pointed them straight to the cross while there was still time on the clock.
So let's synthesize this. Let's pull all of these threads together.
The core message is that time is a microscopic window compared to the vastness of eternity. We must stop frittering away our hours on trivial chatter, on theological technicalities that bear no practical fruit, and on grand illusions that keep us paralyzed in an armchair.
We must gather our scattered energies, pull them out of the stagnant swamps of distraction, and funnel them into a single roaring channel for God's glory.
We need to act with intentional urgency toward the lost, stepping through open doors without hesitation.
And we need to find comfort in our fleeting trials, knowing the train ride is almost over.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as we close. If you viewed your remaining time not as a diminishing resource to panic over, but as a sharply focused lens, what single difficult action would you take today that you have been putting off for someday?
That is the question. What is your grand illusion that needs to be traded for a single tangible action today?
If you knew your personal clock would stop in 3 weeks, whose phone would you ring the moment this audio ends? Do not assume you have a bottomless bank account of days.
The ledger is hidden, but the reality is clear. The time is short.
Thank you for listening to Reformed Thinking. Value every hour. We will catch you on the next deep dive.